Hello and welcome to Environmental Health Issues. This is week 10 and we're going to be talking about policy today. And I'm going to share my screen with you so that hopefully you will see my PowerPoint slides. And yes, that's all looking good. All right, if we're going to promote health and prevent disease associated with environmental problems, then we need to have a little bit of an understanding of policy and policy development, and I'm going to give you a very brief talk about that today. I'm going to give you some examples, I hope, and we're going to talk a little bit about some conundrums, meaning some confusing or difficult situations, and we're going to talk a little bit about policy failure as well. So it's a bit hard to define sometimes, but this definition, of course, or principle of action adopted or proposed by an organisation or an individual, or I might add a country or a state, and we talk about principles, laws, regulations, rules, directions. So it's not just about law, which some people think it is. Law is one form of policy and important, but there are others as listed here. It is used in different ways, or the term is used in different ways, but there are some central features common to all good policy, and that means that includes, it states a matter of principle. The focus is on action, so stating what is to be done and by whom. It is an authoritative statement, so it's made by a person or a body with some power to do so. And a good policy, I would suggest, is a tool that makes administration easier. Well, it's supposed to. So making a policy may well seem like a rational process, but it is often anything but a rational process. It is often complicated, and compromises are often made. Now this slide gives you the rational and perhaps slightly more amusing side of policy making. So we identify the problem, collect the evidence, consider the options. This is the rational approach. Consult stakeholders, make decisions, implement, evaluate, and so on. Sometimes, this is a lovely quote, and I don't know where it comes from, but I have come to the conclusion that the making of laws is like the making of sausages. The less you know about the process, the more you respect the result. I want to talk about a policy failure in some ways. Bhopal is in India, and in 1984, at a pesticide factory, there were 40 tonnes of methyl isocyanate gas leaked from the plant, and immediately killed a bit less than 4,000 people, but it caused significant morbidity and mortality for some time after that incident. Premature death. There were more than 500,000 people who were exposed to this. There were 20,000 deaths recorded. After that, there are many epidemiological studies that suggested that the significant morbidity for some time after that. So it was a terrible accident. Now, the facility operated with safety equipment and procedures that were below the standards found in the sister plant in the United States, in West Virginia, where there were some policies in place, and there were policies in place in India, and the local government was aware of these, but they were reticent to place heavy industrial controls over this plant because it was the economic effects. It employed a lot of people, and they were worried about the economic effects. You can see here the placard. People complained about this, and they talked about, give us Anderson, who was the chief of the Union Carbide, was the company, who was not faced to forced trial. So this disaster, amongst others, really galvanised to some extent organisations and countries at the global level, and really indicated the need to enforce international standards on environmental safety and some preventative strategies to avoid similar accidents and help us prepare for some similar incidences. One of the organisations, the International Labour Organisation, and it's by no means the only organisation, sets out some principles to help workers and governments, and it suggests that the principle that workers should be protected from sickness and disease and injury arising from their employment. And in 2003, the ILO adopted a global strategy to improve occupational safety and health, which included the introduction of preventive safety and health culture in organisations, and the promotion and development of relevant instruments and technical assistance. And the ILO standards and provide really essential tools for governments and employers and workers to establish healthy structures, or establish such healthy practices. This is another example, a bit closer to home, Victoria. This is the Act that establishes the Environment Protection Authority. There is one in each state. There is a national act, but this is the Victorian Act to establish such an organisation, and this really does have power to make decisions and to enforce safety standards on organisations. And so this is a law, obviously, an act, and it has been amended, but this is the original act that establishes such an organisation. So this just shows you that the EPA has authority to protect workers, and it develops policy around environmental standards. I've put this example up. This is the fracking ban in Victoria. Victoria is the only state that has such a ban, and it is a law. And I put this up because it takes a precautionary approach, and as you know, by now the precautionary approach is really do no harm. If you don't really have all of the evidence at hand, you need to be cautious about what you allow to happen or not, as the case may be. And so the Victorian government says, well, there's not enough evidence for us to allow this fracking to take place. And as you know, we've had a little bit of a discussion about this. Victoria has identified some potential problems, but the conundrum is that we need energy and we need lots of it. So what do we do? It has, fracking has, in the United States, for example, has revolutionised the energy industry, but it has also prompted some environmental concerns, as it has in other states of Australia. There are some problems. It takes huge amounts of water, and we don't have enough of that. There are the chemicals that are used are carcinogenic, so problem number 2. So that we could be contaminating groundwater. In the United States, there have been reports of small earth tremors, so potential problem. And so there are benefits in terms of energy, but there are also costs, and of course loss of habitats, not just animals and trees, but also human habitats. So it is highly contested, and as I say, if fracking is allowed, as it is in most states, will this be a policy failure, or will it be a policy failure of Victoria for banning it until we have enough evidence? Many people in the health industry are really urging governments to take a precautionary approach about fracking, but the industry says that they should be allowed to self-regulate. As we have seen on many occasions, industries are often not good at self-regulations, and we need some firm policy guidelines around this to protect the health of the public. And Lock the Gate is one organisation throughout the land that has called for a halt to coal seam gas and drilling in New South Wales in particular, and until we know a little bit more. The other example, or another example that I want to talk about, and if you've watched the film, and I thoroughly recommend that you do, about Wittenoom, it's about asbestos, which we now know, of course, is injurious to health. It was a highly profitable organisation in the industry in the 1930s, and there were a great many people out of work due to the Great Depression, and the Western Australian government and the Australian government were very keen to populate the unpopulated north, as they said in those days, and the government provided subsidies to help build the town of Wittenoom and house the people who were employed there. But of course there were problems. There were James McNulty, as the video says, worked in the tuberculosis control branch of the Public Health Department in Western Australia. He visited there. He could see that there were problems. He was appalled to see mill tailings spread around. He finally convinced people after some time to take some readings of the dust levels in the mine and the mill, and that the results showed gross exposure for workers, but nothing really was done until 1966, when in fact it was unprofitable. It was starting to become unprofitable, and so the mine closed. But he says, as in this video, it has haunted him all of his life, because he said, you've got to ask yourself the questions: what could have been done? The evidence was all about it. So asbestos, as you know, is extremely hazardous. Australia and the UK have the highest rates of deaths in the world because of the amount that we have mined, and of course the types, blue and brown, and it has caused a lot of deaths and problems. And of course with diseases such as mesothelioma, it can be 20 to 40 years before after exposure before problems become evident. But there are laws now. There was a total ban of asbestos in 2003, and there are buildings, of course, all over the country with asbestos in it, but there are regulations and codes of practice. This comes from the Safe Work Australia site. It provides information for employers, employees, and organisations across the country. So Safe Work Australia provides some guidelines. This is a code of practice for asbestos and what organisations are required to do, and there are videos and other, you might have a look at Safe Work Australia about asbestos to see what advice they are providing and codes of practice for all. The other example that I want to raise with you is climate change, and we have to ask ourselves, well, what policies need to be put in place? We could take a rational approach, and we could take the evidence that the IPCC has put before us, and for many years, And they say without additional efforts, emissions growth is expected to persist, given by growth in global population and economic activities, and this will result in some environmental problems. It already has. And as we have discussed, we need to think about the total population, but also about who is most vulnerable. And we are seeing, as I say, impacts now globally, particularly in Pacific Islands and also in rural areas across Australia. It is evident that we need to put some policies in place. This is the World Health Organization. This is just a small number of the things they identify that are going to be or are problems associated with the changing climate. So what has Australia's response been? I can say that there has been a problem. We have signed the Paris Agreement, so we have been provided with a direction, or we have chosen to take a direction. But there are some problems, you know, how do we implement this and what do we need to do? What are the technical issues, meaning, you know, how do we reduce carbon emissions? What's the best way? There is a lot of political argy-bargy about this, and there have been some grand statements, but not a lot of action. The other is an ethical problem. So should big polluters pay, for example? You know, and what does the Australian government have on the world stage? And I would suggest that Australia is a wealthy nation and we are well placed to do something about this and lead in policy development, in fact. But the argument against that development is that globally, you know, our emissions are small, but except for the fact that per capita emissions are very large, as we have discussed. So policies are made at government, as you can see, levels and at organisational levels, and also the health sector has made. There are a number of health organisations that talk about climate change, for example, and this is a summary of the Public Health Association's policy on climate change. And so that just means that that organisation, that's the stand that the organisation takes. So, you know, that a safe environment and climate are core determinants of human health, along with socioeconomic and political structures. So that's, and they provide some action areas that can ensure a safer climate. And so that's another level or direction of policy. So that's a brief whirlwind tour of policy. Do watch the video, do the readings, and I will see you online, I guess, and look forward to your discussions about policy. Thanks very much.